Because in the opening chapter of your book, you talk about fairies quite a
Mm,
lot.
yeah.
And so I was intrigued by the fact that the genre of your book is historical fiction,
Mm,
yet your story is based upon your great grandmother,
mhm, mhm,
Jane.
mhm.
And when I was reading the first chapter, fairies were mentioned, and I was astounded at the culture. So tell us about that. In fact, I'd love you to read the very first chapter because it's beautifully written. It really sets the scene and it really pulled me into the story, which is a really important part of story reading and story writing, isn't it,
Mhm.
Marian?
Yeah.
So if you would read that first chapter, I think it'll give our listeners a real sense of the times in which your story is set.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the first chapter from A Sense of
Yes.
Jane.
Accouchement, 1857. Secrets are held. Sometimes they are passed on, sometimes they are not. The ghosts of the past live quietly amongst the living, and in Victorian Scotland, Milton Cottage was no different. Margaret's relentless journey ended with one final push, and Jane emerged into the world earlier than expected. A surprisingly robust-looking bairn with a shock of dark hair and strong-sounding lungs, she was wrapped quickly in a man's shirt, as was the custom, and a thick woolen shawl to ward off the cold that lingered inside Milton Cottage. As Margaret held her child for the first time, absorbing the tiny features, an immense feeling passed over her that she had no words for, but her mind was still and her heart full. Sarah smiled at her daughter and new grandbairn, relief apparent on her face, thankful that all was well in the end, as her dreams had withheld their secrets. But with little time yet to wallow, the women in attendance scurried. There was work to be done in order to protect both mother and child. The friends and neighbours in attendance set quickly to work to sane Margaret and her daughter. Belief in fairies was strong, their power feared, so the rituals had to be carried out quickly and precisely to prevent mother and child from being carried away. There was many a tale of the fairies taking a newborn or its mother and replacing them with one of their own, a changeling, but only the unsained and unbaptized could be taken, so both would be closely watched by those around them until Margaret had attended church and her quine been baptized. Every 7 years, the fairies had to pay a teend or payment to hell, and a newborn was a perfect substitute for one of the fairies themselves. It was well known that mothers were taken for their milk, as fairies had a great liking for it. Anne lit the fir candle and handed it to Isabella, who held it over the heads of mother and bairn and burled it round them both 3 times, while Sarah set the Bible alongside some bread and cheese under the pillow, chanting the old words passed down through the ages. May the Almighty debar ill faiths in them, and be a booter and blesser in our bairn. The food was then given to Anne and Isabella, as both were unmarried, to be placed under their pillows to evoke dreams. The small heart-shaped brooch, a treasured heirloom, was taken from the drawer and pinned to the petticoat worn by Margaret during her accouchement. And carefully the newborn was passed 3 times through the garment to ward off the fairies and the evil eye, and also to prevent the sin of being overpraised, something that would never be tolerated. Sarah washed the child, being careful to avoid wetting her tiny palms, as to do so would wash away her worldly luck, and the water was disposed of under the house. Once dressed, she was turned 3 times head over heels and blessed, then held upside down and shaken 3 times to protect her. Only the wee one herself could tell what indeed that felt like. Finally, Margaret could hold her daughter again. She alone knew that the quine was to be called Jane, that no name could be uttered aloud until she was baptized. Meanwhile, Sarah called her husband to fetch the old borrowed cradle into the room. Donald the blacksmith had delivered it at break of day on hearing the news. A live cockerel within it, as custom dictated, removed now, of course, and the cradle was placed at the side of the bed. And so it was on a mild spring morning at 10 minutes to 3, on Thursday the 21st of May 1857, in Milton of Auchendoun, Mortlach, the illegitimate daughter of John Cantley was born to one Margaret Smith, daughter of John and Sarah. poor folk with little of anything and one more mouth to feed.